just a very minor preamble in that this is a bit of a new approach for FOLA. We're trying some different things to try and make sure we break it up a little bit, maybe get some more feedback, because we are cognizant of the fact that quite often a lot of your time at plenary is spent just listening to someone or other and hopefully absorbing some information. So the goal of these sessions is very much to get your feedback on things. We would like to hear what you have to say. A reminder that all of this is being recorded, and so for that reason, and for those of us that are hard of hearing, if you wouldn't mind, try and use the mics. That'll make our recording better, and hopefully everybody here will be able to hear you. So Mike Grass has put together some slides, which I am going to only loosely follow, just because that's what I like to do. Don't tell them. But we hope you've had a chance to at least skim some of the materials, and some of you may have read them voraciously. The Phase 5 study, there have been many studies done by the Law Society over the years, from LIST to Phase 5, to try and figure out what was going on in the libraries. And then they came back and said, geez, what's going on is what you told us was going on. But there were 8 themes that were developed in that Phase 5 report. Whoops, let me get the right button, or the wrong button. Oh, hold on. Okay, now I got the right button. And very quickly, we're just going to run through those. Oops, I did that. So, retasking of the physical space. The physical space is becoming in some places less used, but we feel, and I hope you will also feel, that it's very important to have it, because while you can do a lot of things online, there's lots of benefits to having a space, both that you know where you can go and get your answers, you can go and talk to your library staff, you can go and do your CPD, you can go and get a hard copy of a text or book if that's what you want. Libraries in a lot of places are becoming education centers. They're a lot more than just a provider of books and cases. They are offering all kinds of services, including CPD credits, training on various legal research materials. The librarians and the staff there are underused, I think, but they will do training for lawyers and in some cases for the public. Libraries are service centers. They're specialized research centers in some places, and they will sometimes do even fee-for-service providing of legal research for all of us. It's a wonderful service. I belong to 3 local associations, and I'm terrible at research, so I will quite often call Ottawa, Cornwall, and Brockville and ask the same question and compare the answers. Not all the time, because I don't want to waste people's time, but I have done it, Rick. Sorry. Some libraries are doing niche publishing. They are curators of information, where they're offering special validated topic guides and source lists and creating summaries of large data sets, doing things like the will check, which is a new one. We've got them serving as e-branches or e-delivery sites, providing people with internet access when they need it, if you don't have Wi-Fi in your courthouse. They're serving an overall purpose of facilitating access to justice. One of the issues that we're going to have to confront very soon, I think, is how much more our libraries are going to provide services to the general public. Will they or won't they? I think the answer's probably already been decided. Yes, they will. The issue is going to be how they will, and can we control that? Can we limit it, which I think we can, to certain hours? You know, there's staff safety concerns, but I think that both the Attorney General's office, who gives us the space, and the Law Society, who gives us the funding, there's going to be pressures to develop some sorts of systems and protocols where the public can receive some legal information through our libraries. And then the Phase 5 report had a suggestion that libraries can serve as a way to leverage social media. We'll see. I'm not sure that that's what we're going to be trying to task our library staff to do in the near future, but they may. With that little brief summary, I'm going to skip that. There are a number of questions that they wanted us to try and run through, in addition to talking about the director and the skills-based board. I think what I'm going to ask you to do is we'll leave these questions up there for those of you that haven't had a chance to reflect on them, and if you can read the small print, you can take a look at those as we're having the discussion. I'd like to start with the LIRN 3.0, for lack of a better descriptor. Is there anybody here, or would some people give us some feedback on, first of all, the director? I'd like to start with that because my own personal opinion is that's going to be the key to this whole thing. Getting someone and getting the right person. So what I'd like to hear from everybody on is does anybody think that's a bad idea to hire one dedicated individual who will be the hub of the system? And I hope that most people will think that's a good idea. But number two, what do we want that person to do? And what type of person do we think we have to fill that role?
I just have a quick question, which is, what is the board currently doing that, or what will this person do that the board's not doing? Like, what does Martha Foote do, or what should she be doing?
No one's seen Martha Foote in quite a long time that we know of. Her employment got terminated in 2015. Yeah, early 2015 maybe, and we haven't had anybody in that role since. Both she and Beth. Oh, that's awful. Anyway, but the two staff at Library Co. were let go at the same time, and it hasn't had any staff since. The board had been trying to go through this future visioning process for a long time and really spinning its wheels. There's all kinds of reasons why that may have happened, but it just really wasn't coming about with any suggestions as to modernizing the system. And that's what led to the recent round of discussions. Was the Law Society came to us at the start of the year and said, listen, it just isn't working and we can't do this anymore. We've got to go back to the table and we've got to talk shareholder to shareholder. And they've basically cut the board out. So the board is officially managing the day-to-day operations of Library Co. And the budget allocation really is what they're doing. And that's about it.
The real question, I think, is, this is a blue sky sort of session. What would we like to see in a director? What have your libraries been lacking?
Well, I certainly don't want to deprive TLA or any other large association from their staff, but the perfect type of person would be someone like Joan from the Toronto Law Association. She was the head librarian of a major law firm in Toronto for many years, and then was enticed to join the Toronto Law Association, where not only is she the head librarian, but she's also the general manager. We need someone, perhaps from the law community, who has worked with lawyers for years. If we advertised appropriately, I think we might find someone that had those qualities, particularly being able to work with lawyers, and we're certainly not the easiest group of people to work with. And that's a take-charge person, which you usually will find with librarians and local associations. I think that's what we're looking for, and that's what we should be advertising. Certainly no one that's working for the Great Library. Not that I have any biases against them, but we don't want anyone involved with the Law Society. We want someone from perhaps the private legal community who has experience with libraries, dealing with lawyers and administrators. That's what I see as the right kind of person.
Some of the larger associations, as some people do know, have executive directors or chief librarians, different titles depending on where we are. But obviously they have a different skill set than your sort of frontline librarian. And, how does that then flow? If we're following that curve up, where do we end up when we get above that to an ED of the organization who's feeding down in some ways?
So first of all, from TLA, we sincerely hope Joan is not for sale. But I also wanted to say that having been involved in this process with the FOLA reps, your reps did an amazing job, specifically Eldon and Jay and Mike. But Eldon really led the charge on saying, no, we mean no to the Law Society. And I think some of us were quite skeptical early on that definitive no would be accepted. And it really led to a meaningful and appropriate negotiation. So great work, Eldon. And in terms of what we're looking for, I just want to make sure, as somebody was at the table, that I understand it, that what we are now envisaging is a system where each local association will have the privilege and right to hire the staff that's appropriate for their region, but that staff will have to meet certain accountability targets that will be set by the LIRN board through the ED, I guess, and that in order to keep your funding, you can't just hire anybody down the street or somebody that you like, but it's going to have to be somebody who has to be accountable according to a set of measures that will be developed by LIRN. Is that right?
I think so.
That's correct. I mean, not that long ago, I used my home association, Peterborough, as an example, but up until about 10 years ago, we had a retired lawyer who was doing it part-time and just was basically in there to fill in, open the doors and close the doors. And that's not what we need. We need librarians. We need somebody who knows that science, because it is a science. And that's where every association will know their needs better than I think an overarching system often will. But nonetheless, to have minimum accountabilities to say, you can't hire somebody just because they're so-and-so's husband or wife. You need somebody with these minimum skill sets, because the goal is to promote competency and to help with research and do those sorts of things that what is sometimes obvious in the large and even medium-sized law libraries is not always as obvious when we get into the smaller ones.
Right. No, I think that's right. And just another little bit of information on the back and forth of the negotiations. There was a proposal put forward where this director would actually report to Diana Miles or whoever her replacement is at the Law Society. That was another no. We felt for a number of reasons that wasn't going to work. First of all, you could see where it would go and who that person's going to be accountable to. Number two, we felt, and I think rightly so, that staff would not perceive that as being a good thing either. So they're not going to do that. Is there anybody that wants to take the position, or anybody that has the opinion that having a full-time director in charge of Library Co. would be a bad idea, that it would it's not wise to have some central person in charge? And when I say in charge, they're going to be in charge of a Library Co. They're not going to be in charge of your staff. Right? They're not going to be telling your staff what to do on a daily basis. They may send out directives working with the board to the library staff across the province and say, overall, we want to see this. Here's a form that we want with some information that we'd like returned to us on a periodic basis, monthly, quarterly, annually, who knows. They may give that kind of broad directive, but they're not going to be a supervisor.
I think one of the things is they would provide support, though, to some of the smaller associations who need. We have to remember that we go out right now and say we need a particular book each year. We buy 46 copies, 46 separate ways, and we don't leverage our buying power. We don't cooperate in certain things like that. And while each association will, again, know the needs that, Peterborough doesn't need the Canada Shipping Act every year, but there are a number of books that we know everyone needs. There are a number that, as group buying power, those are the sorts of things that we should be leveraging that we're not. And with the costs of the materials, especially the print materials, rising so quickly, it is difficult, if not impossible, I think, in some of the smaller associations where you might only have staff a couple of days a week to spend the time to try to get the budgets under control. So I think that's the other idea behind a central staff member, is another support, another item that can be leveraged.
Mary, I'll come right back. This notion's been around now for a while, and obviously it's been circulated to staff. I assume all of your staff are aware that that is part of the current proposal, is that we would have this director. I'm curious to know if anybody's had any feedback from your staff to say, look, if you're going to get somebody, I talked about the small P political skills. I think that's an absolute must, in my opinion. If we get somebody who is the brightest, most skilled administrator in the world, and they are a prick to work for or work with, it's not going to work well. They'll be met with hostility and resistance. So, Mary?
Well, I'm just, when I look at what our current situation is and what the issues are, and whenever you mention about the increasing costs of library materials, I question whether or not I think we have to be careful, because I think the skill set that is needed for someone to oversee this is not specific to someone that otherwise is a librarian or is a lawyer. I think it's someone that is good with human resources. I think it's someone that is good politically, that it's someone that can deal with Westlaw and Carswell and all of these companies that are right now charging outrageous amounts for loose leaf series, and try and bring the costs under control that way. They don't need, I think that there is a good number of the law librarians right now coordinate between each other. I know as a small library that if we are missing a book, or if there's more specific material that we need, they arrange to get it through other libraries. And I know that if they have questions, they have access to a wealth of information from other librarians in other counties. So I don't know whether or not they really need a director that is saying, these are the books you need to buy. That is what there can be a recommended suggested readings or recommendations made to our associations. But I remember when I was on our library committee going through that list and saying there were a few books there was not a chance anyone in the last 20 years has needed that book, because that area of practice just isn't touched upon, and there would be a way we could have received it otherwise. But I would have thought that the skill set should look a little bit broader and say it's someone that's managing. It's not necessarily someone that has the substantive knowledge with running a library as much as substantive knowledge as to how to run a company and how to politically deal with all of the different agencies that have to coordinate and cooperate in order to make it successful.
Kristen?
Yeah, in Kingston, I know one of the concerns that was brought up by our staff was the understanding the regional aspect and understanding that things are different in smaller centers. So again, maybe that goes in with the sort of the HR aspect and the small P political, but just an appreciation and understanding that things are different in Kingston and in Thunder Bay versus bigger centers. So that sort of that skill or even a desire to learn more about the associations or visit them and that sort of thing to understand the regional aspects.
So we need somebody who's actually traveled outside the GTA during their lifetime. Okay? No, I mean, I make light a little bit, but I do think that is important, because Ontario is a big province and there are lots of regional differences. And you know, if you travel around, which I got the chance to do more than I would have as chair, you see a lot of that. I know we've got some staff in the room, and I don't want to pick on them, but either they or those of you who are presidents, do you feel your staff would have any concerns about that director not being a trained librarian? Do you think that would cause concern? You're not allowed to throw things.
I'm not going to be popular here, sorry. I would ask that maybe before you decide whether it should be a librarian or not a librarian, that maybe you should look at the skill sets that librarians graduate with, what they do in different settings and the different skills they bring, business, management, HR. I think there's a mindset that isn't really current. So look at what they graduate with, look at what they have to learn. These professionals are multi-skilled people who manage, in some cases, very large staff, very large sophisticated operations. I don't think you should dismiss them just because it's the L word. And the fact that they're running a very complicated 46 location setting means, yes, they should have some library skills. How can you have somebody run a system of libraries if they're not trained in libraries? My humble opinion, sorry, I knew you would know.
I don't think you should be sorry at all. I wholeheartedly agree with you. But this isn't supposed to be my opinion. That's why we want to try and hear from you. I personally believe that that person has to have that academic background together with those other skills, but others may disagree, and who knows who will apply for this job if we manage to get it to advertised at some point. Yep.
So my understanding is that Library Co. will remain as is. We're not dissembling, and the shareholders will stay.
We're just going to do what's popular and change the name.
Okay.
The corporation will continue to exist, and we'll have the same shareholders agreement, same shareholders, but it will be LIRN instead of Library Co. But yes, the structure is going to stay.
So I guess my concern would be for this director that you're going to have potentially, how they're going to be looked at, how they're accountable to, if it's the board that they're going to be, presenting their information to about the associations across the province. You don't want this project to be a 1 year or 2 year thing that this director shows up and you have disagreement amongst the shareholders, because clearly there's been an imbalance in the past about the viability of having that director position and obviously funding it, because we have funding issues.
I don't know that there was necessarily a disagreement in the need in the past, and a lot of people don't always know, but with some of the staff that was in those positions, there were definitely some small p political skills, to be polite, that caused issues. And I think the idea was they threw the baby out with the bathwater. They said, let's not hire anybody until we figure out what we want for a governance structure. And the issue is now that they've been without a staff and things haven't exploded, there's not the desire to spend the money sometimes, is my feeling. So, we have to remember as well, the whole plan here, while the shareholder agreement and that structure remains the same, the board will no longer be 3 FOLA members, 1 TLA member, and 4 Law Society appointees. It will be a skills-based board who the director would report to, and then the board reports to the shareholders.
Yeah, I just think it'd be fair for that director to have a list of accountability or review set out in advance, that they know what they're expected to do and that there is an agreement at the board level about what this person's here for. If they're doing a great job at the association level, but then we get to the board level and the board isn't happy, well, we don't have a problem.
No, that's a good point.
Yeah,
Strict RFP.
and the general consensus is, I think, that if we can get the board in place, then the first job for the board will be to set out the skills they want in that director and set up the job description for that director and give that person their marching orders.
Thank you. Nicola Edmondson from Lanark. When I think of the law library, and I'm in a small town, a small community, we have 57 members. And when I look at the local libraries, and we've done a lot of work in the recent couple of years regarding access to justice and trying to coordinate with our local libraries to look at resources going into those spaces in order to provide them for members of the public. And I have been so impressed with the skills of librarians, their knowledge of the communities that they reside in, their ability to manage their staff, their abilities to manage volunteer groups, to deal with mothers with small children coming in, teenagers doing homework at the library, and running things like knitting circles or whatever. I look at some of those people and the real finger they have on the pulse of the community, and I do think a librarian background is very, very important. I don't know that it needs to be a legal librarian. And some of the skills they have with their community are much more important in terms of being able to just deal with the needs of the user. And that's what we're talking about. And in this situation, it's lawyers. But so for the director, I would think a knowledge of the great variety of libraries that we have in the province would probably be much more important.
Okay. Thank you. Here's a quick practical question for all of you, and I'm going to ask you for a show of hands rather than verbal feedback. This director is going to have to be somewhere. They're going to have to be housed somewhere. And of course, our friends at the Law Society of Ontario, got to get used to that. Their position is that person has to be at the Law Society. At least that's my take. How many of you would feel that, yes, that's probably the right place for that person to go to work every day is at the Law Society somewhere? Rent space.
Elsewhere.
Do they have to be in Toronto? Right? Can they be in Ottawa?
CCLA has a nice library.
Does so. It's going to get nicer too. No space? Does that?
Oh, no, we'll have space,
yeah. So again, anybody have, should that person be at the Law Society?
No.
Okay.
Anywhere but.
Right. And again, I'm not sure if there'll be an outcome, but I wanted to get that feedback. Because of course our concern is that if you're inside that and the people from the Law Society can be constantly, giving their feedback at the water cooler, as it were, there's going to be a bias that's going to develop, and that person may be seen to have a bias, whether they do or not. Okay, time is actually going by faster than we thought. Skills-based board. Is there anybody who feels that that's just a terrible idea and we should keep the board as it's currently constructed with simply nominees from each of the 3 shareholders? 1. 2. Okay. And again, no, sorry, just to reiterate, the question was, should we keep the board as it's currently constituted with simply nominees from 4, 3, and 1? So assuming that, and again, who knows what's going to happen, but in general, if we're talking about then moving to this skills-based board, anybody have ideas, and having thought about it, as to what the most important skills are to have in that group of probably 8 individuals?
I would think HR experience.
Okay.
Finance.
And by finance, do you mean finance or accounting?
Well, accounting.
Or both? I mean, they're related, obviously, but okay.
Law and library are 2 obvious ones. What about commercialization of the space? I mean, somebody who has a fundraising attitude or something, a generative concept there of how to take our libraries and start using them, as some associations have, as money-making centers to increase their collection and staff.
Sorry, if I can respond to the earlier comment.
Yeah.
Skill-based, I think, is very important, but they also have to be representative. We need folks who understand what it's like outside of Toronto and in the smaller areas. So if they've got all the skills, but they don't understand that, that doesn't help us at all.
So geographical representation as well. That's a good point.
How many people are going to be on this board?
Well, we'll hope. I mean, first of all, the Law Society's take is that this can be done on a volunteer basis. That's what they're going to seek out is volunteers. I think that'll be hard with no compensation at all, but we'll see. We would hope that you may get some of these people who will have skills in more than one area. What about IT skills or social media skills? Okay. May have any other things? And again, we may not be able to get the absolutely perfect board. They'll try and create one, and then I think try to get as close to it as we can. And when you're asking for volunteers, it may be harder. Rick?
Yeah, I think going back to the earlier commentary around, definitely you do need a director, and part of the discussion with respect to a director, a full-time director, and a board, there has to be some discussion around, is it going to be a bit of an operationally focused board, a governance board, a policy board? Because if you want a more operational board, then obviously you want the finance, you want IT, you want entrepreneurial, maybe you want government relations, you want representation. If it's more policy, governance, visioning, that dictates a different skill set. And then that also transfers into what's the mandate of the director. Should the director be a skilled librarian? Do they need to be a change agent? Do they need to be skilled at HR? Obviously, public relations skills, people skills are critical because you have to work with so many different players. You have the Law Society dynamic. They'll have to work with the board, they'll have to work with the shareholders, they'll have to work with the librarians, with FOLA, different organizations. So it really does demand someone who can work well in all of those different arenas and sort of jump over the different sandboxes, if you will, and kind of harness everybody. There's lots of expertise in the system. I mean, you heard Kelly say there's a lot of skilled librarians. So again, determining what the mandate of the person is. Do you want them to be very well-versed in legal information and library services, or do you want to split between that and, association management or government relations? So there's a real opportunity here to look, because you do have a good opportunity to look at the two together, which is kind of unique because you're building a bit of a new entity.
Since the local law libraries are the employers of the librarians, does anybody in this room, the president specifically, have issue with FOLA contacting their employees directly to seek input on what they think is important in a board or a director?
I'd prefer to see it go to the Law Library Committee in my association, for example.
Okay. Fair enough. You mean the LIRN one? The PRC?
I was just going to make a comment on the issue of whether it's a policy board and operations board. I sit on two boards that are technically policy boards, but I find that we often dip into operational stuff, and having the skill sets we've been talking about are quite valuable whether or not it's a policy board or an operations board. If you've got people, particularly with employment law experience, or they've got an entrepreneurial background, that plays well even on a policy board, because they are making decisions, and often the director will come to them looking for advice about issues, and if there's expertise there, it really makes things flow more smoothly.
Yeah, I may be incorrect in this, but I'm fairly confident that at the end of the day, this will be a governance/political board for a whole host of reasons, not the least of which is we are going to seek some geographic diversity. This is not a board that's going to meet, maybe quarterly would be the most that the board is likely to meet, unless there's, in the short term, maybe a little more. But on an ongoing basis, I don't see this board as having much direct operational input unless there's a specific question that comes back to them. So I think it's going to be much more intended to be governance type. And the real goal is to try and come up with a vision for the future, right? You heard Dan Pennington's presentation at lunch, and I'm sure we've all heard a number of them over time. Things are changing, and we've got to at least attempt to try and get our system ready to deal with what the future needs are going to be of the lawyers.
Something I want to encourage everybody in this room is, to echo some of Jay's comments earlier, this problem or this issue has slowed. Whereas we presented a worst case scenario of what could happen, we now know that this is going to be a year plus out until we're really seeing a large move on this. So many of the presidents in this room will have ended their term or passed the torch in some way. So please make sure you're engaging your librarian and your successors so that those individuals are briefed on these issues as we go ahead. Because as we've seen, sometimes the worry is that the ball starts rolling faster than we anticipated, and we need to be ready to react and hopefully not bring everybody through again another 20-year history of how libraries or Library Co. came through. So please make sure that you're interacting with that. And just a takeaway as well, start thinking about if you're librarians and you have not started thinking about how to innovate and adapt your spaces. Something I do disagree with Eldon a little bit on is the importance of things like social media and engaging the younger lawyers coming out right now. We will not engage them with a traditional library. They will need a space that markets to them, that allows convenience to them, that allows them to remotely do research, to access things in a different way than many people traditionally have seen. And we have to remember that in the last couple of years, we've got 46 law libraries, and I think we've had 5 or 6 librarians pass away because of age. So there are still a number of individuals in local associations who are very experienced, but they may not be as open to change as others, which could be the death knell for certain local law libraries, and that's exactly what we're trying to prevent.
We've only got a few minutes left, and I'm going to skip ahead and combine the last 2 questions that were on the slides that you got, just to see if anybody has any great ideas on should our libraries be trying to enhance the services that they provide, and should they consider trying to have some kinds of value-added services? Should they be doing more on other things? So Will Check is a great example of something that I don't think would have been on the radar a while back, but obviously it's a service that has the potential to be a big benefit to the bar, provided through the CCLA Law Library. Are there other examples from the people in the room, the things that are going on in your library that you think should be something that happens across the province? We recognize, of course, that not everybody is the CCLA. They've got a big membership base, they've got great staff, they've got a high-end board. So they have the wherewithal to do some things that maybe smaller associations can't. Anybody here have an example from your own association of things that the libraries, or things that are happening in your libraries that are benefiting your members beyond the traditional books and research?
I mean, I'll share a couple of things that I've seen in my travels across Ontario in certain of the libraries, but recognizing that last time I was in Durham, they have they'll loan you an iPad for the day with the Quick Law and Westlaw and all of those already on it, so that you can borrow that as a visiting lawyer, or if you need access quickly in court. I've been to some associations that offer member benefits, so deals they've cut with local businesses, that a cheaper gym or something like that. Some associations have really engaged in social media and remote access to allow members, especially over the large geographic areas in some of our more northern areas, but even in smaller places where people would rather be working in their office. So those are some ideas of innovation. And I think we all need to be looking at how can our law libraries innovate and adapt to remain relevant.
Daniel Ventresca, past president of the Lincoln County Law Association. One of the things, or some of the things that we do that are outside of the more traditional books and research. We plan programs, CLE, for not only our members, but also for the lawyers and the community at large. Lunch and Learn. We have programs, was mentioned earlier, about mentoring dinners. In addition to research, we allow the public into our law library. I believe it's Friday afternoons. It's known there's a public library nearby, and they know that if people want to come, that they can come over and use our library. Other groups have used our boardroom for their meetings, and certain groups within the courthouse itself, the Indigenous Peoples Court, will sometimes use our library for meetings. So there's a lot of things that we do outside the standard, hi, I need this book, or I need this topic. And it's a multifaceted kind of place, and it is a resource, not only for the lawyers and the members of our association, but the community at large.
Thank you.
So I would just say in Simcoe, we've actually made it an effort on behalf of the solicitor side, because we don't use the law library that often, to create more of a meeting space for us. So we are actually doing some CBD at the law library, the real estate that's coming up on November 21st. And we have Ian Hall coming to do presentations to our wills and estates lawyers. We're meeting at the law library instead of going to a different facility. So those are just some general ideas.
Yeah. Thank you.
No, I mean, it's good to hear those things, and it's part of the whole process at the FOLA plenary, is to let you hear from other associations. So we're going to try and keep on time, because I know I need a break. So we're going to head upstairs. I don't know if there's still coffee out back, but you guys can all stay put, and then you can talk about consultations.